thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity of being here. So, kia ora. I think that's as far as my Maori stretch, having been in the country for 18 months. But here we are. Is this the Prince on the White Horse? And is this going to help us to finally escape the consequences of tobacco smoke? And is it going to help New Zealand to achieve the smoke-free goal of 2025? There's a lot to say here. I can talk a little bit fast, so if I get too fast, you can slow me down. But the important thing here is to remember that it's beginning to emerge that patients are using e-cigarettes irrespective of what the evidence says. And they're asking about it and they want to use it. And where do you find yourself in that situation? And the important thing is that this may be the last resort. It may be for that patient that just have tried everything, still can't do it. This may be the answer. So from that perspective, we're going to talk about where it comes from, what it is, the legislation around it, and then just like any good clinician, as John has said, when they talk about prescribing medications, not only do you tell the patient what it's going to do for them, but you have to tell them the adverse effects that may come with it. I'm going to touch on those, and I hope I'm not going to scare you, because I don't want to prevent you from using this, but you need to be aware. Who in this room has a social media account? Hands up. So do your patients. So they see things on Facebook. They go to Mr. Google. They talk to one another. So if you're sitting with a patient and they ask a question about popcorn lung, what are you going to say? That's the stuff that I'm going to be talking about. All right, so let's get going. Vape and e-cigarettes, what's the difference? Are we comparing apples and oranges, or is it just a bunch of bananas? Is it actually everything exactly the same? And that is what it is. It's a bunch of bananas. It's the same device, whether you vape or whether you use an e-cigarette. The World Health Organization refers to it as electronic nicotine devices, and that is basically the electronic cigarette, the e-cigarette. So the difference between those that just vape and those that use it as an e-cigarette is nicotine, and that's the key thing that we'll be talking about a little bit later. But where did it start? Allow me to introduce Hon Lik. This is a Chinese, as you could see, that was his idea. He's an inventor. He's also a pharmacist. He studied at the traditional Chinese medicine school and graduated in pharmacy. He's an inventor. And in 2003, heavy smoker, as was his dad. Dad succumbed to lung cancer, and he decided, I need my nicotine fix without all of the toxins. And that's where the development basically started from. He launched the product. It wasn't the very first patent that was ever issued for an e-cigarette. In 1968, one was issued in America for a man to a device that actually allowed you to inhale flavored steam. Not very different from the vape devices that we have today, but it never really took off. So the e-cigarette essentially has a battery, a lithium-ion battery, which means it needs to be charged. That just looks different, doesn't it? You just don't plug in a cigarette. But it has electronic aspects, and it then has a liquid that it turns into a vape that you can inhale. Rosie is going to go onto hands-on devices, but it's safe to say that it started with devices that looked like cigarettes, has developed. This is a battery. But these little bottles of liquid, this is your e-juice or your e-liquid that they purchase, goes into this little chamber, and you can see this little chamber here. It's a tiny part, even the e-cigar and the e-pipe. But this is essentially the e-juice that they refer to. And that is made up either with or without nicotine. It has flavorings, and we're going to talk about flavorings and the active ingredients in some of the flavorings, and then propylene glycol and vegetable glycerine. And as you can see, more than 7,000 varieties in the market today. Initially, from the country of origin, all of the devices were made in the People's Republic of China, and so was all the e-juice. Regulation? Labeling requirements? Doesn't exist. So the stuff that comes out of the People's Republic of China is probably still not regulated, and that's an important aspect that we'll pick on a bit later. That's the size of the market. You got spare money to invest? Not a bad place to put this, because it's going to continue to grow. And then there was a report in the Telegraph in the UK where they estimated that it was going to reach 6 billion in 2015, and I think this sums it up. It is the new oil rush. Anybody knows what the gold rush and the oil rush was all about? This is the same thing. It is just impacting our health and impacting our lives in a different way. I've got a little video clip for you. It's got no sound, and I could only capture a little bit. But you know, there was a man in England that once said, all the world's a stage. Well, look at this. This is international competitions, and we've got young people showing off their tricks. Unfortunately, as I said, it's only part of it that is captured, but the audience and the adjudicators were full of admiration for this young man. He had a standing ovation for the tricks that he pulled off this day. So, fascinated, mesmerized we are. And so are the youth as well around us. But the thing that we have to remember is that it's around us and it's probably here to stay. But when I was a little girl, I had an uncle that could blow smoke rings. Anybody else in the room that had a family member? It fascinated me. Smoke rings, whoa! And if he blew two, I was even more impressed. That was just grand. Look at this guy. And this is what they do these days. There's special devices being created to actually produce more vape. And then you look at comments like this, that vaping competitions are heating up. That's, Wall Street journals. Everything you want to know on Mr. Google about competing and how to do it and how to blow these tricks. And lessons. Man, if you want to become an expert, there's lessons on YouTube on how to do all of this. And competitions that are being held, internationally and on our soil. Here we go. Wellington Vape Day and Taranaki in New Plymouth Vape Day. So, vape shops popping up in Wellington. We have them in Hamilton as well. They're close to the hospital. They're close to some of the schools. So I think you would agree with me if I say it's here to stay. So we got to deal with it. It's like you just got to deal with it. So how do you answer the questions? But in New Zealand, we have this very, very tender balancing act between what the law says and what is currently happening out there in the marketplace. So nicotine is a scheduled substance. It is a medication. It is registered with MedSafe. It is a medication. So therefore, there's legal and illegal stuff surrounding it. So if you make a claim that it has a therapeutic goal, so you can quit smoking like we have with the patches and the gum and all of the everything else, it has to be registered with MedSafe. Well, guess what? None of the e-cigarettes are. None of them have applied to be a non-smoking device. Not in New Zealand, not in America with the FDA, not in the UK with the MHRA. The legal thing here for New Zealand is that you can import as much as you want for 3 months for yourself. You're not allowed to sell it. And the other aspect as well is that you're not allowed to vape where you're not allowed to smoke. But if you go out in the marketplace and you go out into the vape shops, it's been available since 2007. And you go and look what is available in the shops, and they have nicotine liquid. So we have this dichotomy. The law says this, yet where do we find ourselves? So it's readily available. People can go into these shops and buy what they need. And it has grown in popularity. So in view of all of this, the government has taken note. And that, I think, is the exciting thing for us. When this was announced last year, that e-cigarettes will be legalized. It's going to be regulated as consumer products. And this has taken time, but it was that fine balance of getting it right, nicotine being a medication at this moment that needs to be made available as a consumer product. And they wanted to ensure that they get that balance right. Therefore, they've not rushed into this. So what can we expect to see? So from sort of the middle of this year, we can expect to see the legalized sales of nicotine containing e-cigarettes and e-liquids. There will be control on the supply, age, where will it be displayed, how it will be displayed, and where it would be available. And what really excites me is requirements for patient safety, because that at the end of the day is really why we're here, is patient safety. So we've got to make sure that what they use is safe for them to use. And we'll talk a little bit later on the nicotine concentration and the risk of poisoning to young children. So amazing that they're picking up on this and saying that it needs to be in a child-proof container. And then, of course, upholding the Smokefree Environments Act so that you're not allowed to vape where you're not allowed to smoke. So, what's happening elsewhere in the world? And are they using e-cigarettes for smoking cessation? So where have we come from? And let's talk about the initial research that's backing up some of the decisions that have been made and have been adopted. So the key thing here is when we look at the World Health Organization, and there we go, the ENDS, the electronic nicotine device. Not a lot of information on the WHO's website, but this is what put the cat amongst the pigeons. A publication in 2015 by Public Health in England, 95% safer than smoking. The actual paper says that there's a 4% of the relative harm of cigarettes overall, including social harm, and 5% of the harm to users. So it's in the words, it's 95% safer. So it's much safer than smoking a cigarette. And what they say is that there's no gateway for youngsters. Park this idea because this is an important aspect. And then a year later, the Royal College of Physicians says that in the interest of public health, we should promote this then as a substitute for smoking. Two very key statements that has been quoted worldwide in this attack against smoking, or to reduce smoking. Just across the ocean in Australia, again, used as a substitute. And the important thing that they pick up here, so not as an addition, so this is the dual use, so we'll talk about dual use in a little bit, but not to be misunderstood that they are healthy. It's healthier than smoking, but it's not healthy. So therefore patients can't continue to use e-cigarettes for the rest of their life. If we're going to use it to vape, to quit, it's important that they quit, and it's important that they stop taking the nicotine that is in these e-cigarettes. There are some toxins in it, but it's much less, but it is still there. So that brings us to our own home ground. A position statement from the Ministry of Health, published very, very recently, and this is what they say. So in there, with an expert opinion, it holds that e-cigarettes are significantly less harmful than smoking tobacco, but not completely harmless. And as long as you keep that is the key message. Yes, you're going to be better off smoking or using an e-cigarette than you would be as smoking, but it does have health implications. There are side effects to this, just like any amazing drug that we have. Just be aware of it, and we've got to get them off that. So when we look at our ambitious goal, this is a world first. When we achieve this, this will be absolutely amazing. So the Ministry of Health believes that e-cigarettes has a potential to contribute to achieving this, as well as the fact that it may actually disrupt the health inequalities. You've seen on John's slide this morning, the Maori and the Pacific population is smoking a lot more than any of the others. We've spoken about pregnancy, and what surprised me from your slide is that the younger girls smoke more than the boys. So it's important that we then also take note that the extent to which it may actually help public health is this thing. Would it help people to get out of smoking? But at the same time, it shouldn't act as a gateway. We've got to protect our youth. And there's lessons from America as far as this is concerned. The government is committed to harm reduction and to help smokers that wants to switch to e-cigarettes to use that. But have we asked the smokers? I think the overwhelming popularity is when you come across patients that they begin to ask about it and they want to use it. And this is exactly what we've seen in the UK. Reasons why people use this. This is a study that was published in 2016 to help me stop smoking tobacco entirely. So the two groups that we have, this is the current e-cigarette user and the ex-smoker. So they've used this as a quitting aid. No question about it. They want to stop completely. But this is the trick here, to help me reduce the amount of tobacco I smoke, but not to stop completely. Can you hear the alarm bells going off? Not to stop completely. So I'm just going to switch. So I'm still going to have some tobacco on the side, and I'm going to have some e-cigarette on the side. Well, is that a good thing? No, it's not a good thing. And you'll see later on why it is not a good thing and why it is important to switch them. The concern that has been expressed in the UK as well is that the public perception is really, really low about the safety of e-cigarettes. So the public in general, views it with the same suspicion as they may view smoking as well. It has become the most popular quitting aid. You can see that incredible increase there for e-cigarettes. And Professor Kevin Fenton said that it works well, exactly where you are. Local stop smoking services. Yes, it works with a fairly high success rate. And this is where you need to give patients support when they come to you and wanting to use the e-cigarettes. How does it stack up against the prescription medications that we have? This is our electronic cigarette here, and you can see it's more popular than prescription treatment, more popular than NRT over the counter, more popular than NRT prescribed, and shock horror. People go to e-cigarettes rather than stop smoking services. And it's actually made a dent in the services in the UK. And that's the danger that we face here, is that people are going to go a DIY with the e-cigarette. And exactly as John has said, those are the people, and as Rosie has said, why go the hard road? Why not go the easy road? Why not get the support that you need to actually help you get through this and get off this smoking, and then remain off and not relapse again later on? But have you actually wondered why an e-cigarette is so effective? And this is the trick, the holy grail of NRT. Sorry, if I just want to move back there for one moment. Success in quit attempts increases with the use of e-cigarettes. But looking at the holy grail of NRT is a product that will deliver the nicotine to the brain as quickly as a cigarette does. You've heard what Rosie said about the inhalator. It gets it to the brain quickly, and that's that whoof, that release of dopamine. That's the gratifying thing about a cigarette. The benefit that the e-cigarettes offer as well is the sensory and the behavior benefit. It's the same as putting a cigarette in their mouth. And this is what people tell you. I miss that, so I suddenly begin to eat, apart from the appetite that suddenly wakes up. But how much nicotine is there in an e-cigarette? And what are the things that we need to watch out for? This is a little infographic. These are available on Google anywhere. You can go and search for them. A normal cigarette, probably about 18 milligram. It's expressed in milligrams per mil or in a percentage. But this is the thing to watch for. It's this throat hit, and that's what a smoker will tell you. It hits the back of my throat, and then I get that dopamine release. So it feels very similar to them when they use the e-cigarette to when they're using a cigarette. Shock horror, when I looked at another infographic, spot there, 24 milligram, 36 milligram. And for the first time, I realized that nicotine liquid could actually be stronger than what is generally available in a cigarette. Most of the research says that smokers sort of self-regulate, and they know what they need, and they sort of stick to that. And a very small percentage of them use these higher concentrations. But this website, this man in his blog says to them, "Wow, it's amazing. You need to try a higher strength." And there's active encouragement to get people to use higher strengths of a nicotine liquid. And we've got to keep in mind that it does have a lethal dose. Nicotine poisoning is very real. We see it in poison centers in America. But adults could become poisoned as well, especially when they mix their own stuff and they don't know what they're doing. So watch out for that. So the key things that you need to look at then is things like nausea and vomiting or excessive salivation or abdominal pain when they need to get to an accident and emergency department as soon as possible. But there's even advice on which strength of nicotine liquid to select depending on the amount of cigarettes that you smoke. Not very different from the patch when we say you smoke so much, therefore this is the amount of nicotine that you're going to need in a patch. So a lot of information out there for people. But is there a fatal flaw in our research? So now we're going into the tricky bits. We know with cigarettes, we didn't know at the beginning how dangerous they were. We didn't know what they were going to do to our health. That emerged much later on. And even when the warnings started appearing, most of the population in America was already addicted. And the addictive substance in a cigarette is nicotine. The addictive substance in an e-cigarette is nicotine. Less toxins, but the nicotine is still there. And this probably will answer one of the questions about nicotine. And this, I just want to say that this is probably beginning to move into the landmark area or the landmine area. It may be some controversial thoughts, some controversial information, but I don't want this to scare you off I want you to just be aware of this. Put it at the back of your mind, have it on your radar, that when you begin to read things, that you're aware of it. You can say, I heard about this once before. But what's happening with nicotine is that when all of the carcinogens was investigated, nicotine was excluded. Never thought that it could be, and is not seen as a carcinogen, and not considered as a substance that should be reduced in concentration when people are exposed to it. This is limited research, tiny, tiny, tiny research, but it has shown that it may actually stimulate the growth of cancer cells and that there is oxidative stress. And the question that these specific researchers asked, nicotine receptors are throughout the body. Does this then actually contribute to the cancer load that we are seeing? We don't know. This is another reason why a patient should quit, not stay on e-cigarettes for life, okay? So it may look like the white horse. Just keep that in mind. So just like any medication, when is it good to use? So short term. For smokers, not people that just want to try it. But if this is your smoker that have not been able to quit, they've used everything they possibly can, hasn't worked, this may be the answer for a short term as part of a vape to quit protocol. Those are just the side effects that you would get even if you use cigarettes sometimes. Long term, not advised because we don't know what the health risks are. These have not been determined by research. And just like the other medications, avoid it during pregnancy. But let's look at the toxin yield then and load of cigarettes. And this is a New Zealand study that was published in 2015. And they compared e-cigarettes against Marlboros. For those that know, Marlboros are the daddy of the cigarettes. It's quite loaded. It's one of the strongest cigarettes that you could possibly find. And they found that the toxic aldehydes is tiny compared to what you would find in a cigarette, and that the nicotine content is much lower. So the conclusion that they came to is that it was relatively safe to switch to. So switching then from smoking to an e-cigarette. But what about the vapor? And this is the interesting thing, that a lot of information came from dental publications, because they see what is happening in patients' mouths, and was published perhaps before the medical literature picked up on this. Again, can I point out, in vitro, but they've seen DNA strands and cell death. They've seen that the exposure may ultimately result in cancer. So it is not as safe as the marketing campaigns make them to be. You look at this, freedom to have a cigarette without the guilt. Some other adverts say, why quit? Just switch. And they actively encourage people that when they've made the switch from cigarettes to e-cigarettes, to remain on those e-cigarettes. So you need to be aware of that. That's one of the challenges that you may face. And it's therefore important to stress that it shouldn't be used long term. Now, excuse the pun, we're going to talk about popcorn lung, and there's a video for you. So I'm not saying that e-cigarettes will cause popcorn lung, but what we need to be aware of is that diacetyl has been found in most of the flavors that comes with e-cigarettes. So most of the stuff is made in the Republic of China, where there's no regulation on what goes into it. There's no labeling requirements. So the label may not actually specify that the product contains diacetyl. Some of the e-liquids are now being manufactured in Europe and in the USA with far better quality, and diacetyl is not available in the products that is available in the UK. And I really believe that that is something that you need to speak to patients about, that if they do not use a good quality flavouring agent, or they're not aware of the source and where it comes from, this is something that they may experience. So your patient may present with coughing or wheezing and shortness of breath. And this is especially for the youngsters. You know, when we were little and your mom got a whiff of smoke because you maybe had one behind the bicycle shed, she would know. I mean, cigarette smoke isn't a flavour, or, you know, is a nice fragrance. So mom picked that up. But the new flavours are magnificent. I mean, cherry and caramel and chocolate and whatever else. Chances are she's not going to smell that on anybody's clothes. But young Johnny may present with any of these symptoms. So children, as well as adults, are just as prone to this, and just be aware of it. So just to place that on your radar. Because it is inhaled, you know, we still get the pathophysiological changes in the respiratory tract, as you would when people would smoke. So anybody with asthma that has a hyperreactive respiratory tract is going to react to smoking. The same has happened here, and we're talking specifically about adolescents and school students. In this case, it's mice. So I don't think they go to school, but in youngsters you can expect. So suddenly, if there are people or you're presenting with worsening of the symptoms or an increase of their phlegm, just be aware that that could be the consequence of their e-cigarette use. So it's important to create that awareness with the youngsters as well. So there is an association between e-cigarette use and myocardial infarction. There is vascular changes that take place, but the danger is that it is in addition to and over and above the smoking. So this is your dual user. Here is the one that says, well, I'm going to have a little bit of e-cigarettes, so I can drop my nicotine a little bit, and I'm going to enjoy both. But there is the risk of an MI. So this basically just says that the dual use of e-cigarettes and smoking is substantially more dangerous. Get your patients to switch. So if you're going to make the change, switch completely from smoking to e-cigarettes. The next one is one publication. Again, I want to put it in perspective. This is not happening to everybody, but please be aware of this. And that's the implication when you assess patients for surgery. We know that smoking affects wound healing, and this is the very first time that an article has been published about the impact of e-cigarettes on wound healing. This is a patient who declared that she was a smoker and declared herself as a non-smoker. She stopped. She is truthfully not smoking anymore. But after she had the mastectomy and developed tissue necrosis, the team began to investigate and only then uncovered that she was actually using e-cigarettes, heavily using e-cigarettes. So what does that mean in practice? So this means we've got to change the questions that we ask. No longer is it good enough to say to a patient, do you smoke? No, says patient, I don't smoke. You've got to go to the next question. Do you use e-cigarettes? That is critically important. And then if the patient is an e-cigarette user, you may need to change to another form of nicotine replacement in the perioperative and the pre-peri and post-operative period to allow those wounds to heal completely before the patient can go back. There's a gory picture with this. If you don't want to see the gory picture, close your eyes now. I'll show it for a moment and then I'll move on. Okay, gory picture. You could open your eyes again. This is the safety concerns that have happened. It's a lithium-ion battery. We all know about the reports on aeroplanes of lithium-ion batteries exploding. For this reason, you can take a device into a cabin, but you're not allowed to use it, just like you're not allowed to smoke. But there's a real risk that the batteries may actually explode. This young man had an ill-fitting device, used a different battery with the wrong device, and therefore it actually exploded in his face, and he ended up ventilated in the hospital. Not going to happen to everybody. And if it's a decent device and it's well made, not a problem. But it can. And I think we just need to be aware of that. Thank you, John. I'm done with those. Thank you. So, anybody found themselves in that situation? I have. Living in the UK and going to work, and I get onto the platform and it's white. It's like, where do I go? Do I duck underneath this? Do I hold my breath and quickly run through it? Can I inhale it? And that is the question. What about passive vaping? We know, and you've touched on the importance of vaping, passive smoking with children. Well, rest assured that with e-cigarette vape, formaldehyde is much less than it is in a cigarette. Toxins is up to 450 times less than it would be in a cigarette. The thing to keep in mind is cotinine levels. So nicotine is converted in the body, it's broken down to cotinine. And when these researchers measured the amount of cotinine in the bodies of passive smokers and that of passive vapors, they found it was the same. How is it possible? Well, not only do they exhale all of this vape that may contain nicotine, but nicotine is very, very fat soluble. So it deposits on everybody's skin, and it's actually absorbed through the skin as well. It deposits on the surfaces, and people touch surfaces. So all of this exposes to the skin to nicotine that could actually possibly be absorbed. So be aware, and that's one of the reasons why we shouldn't smoke in the same, or vape in the same areas where we shouldn't smoke. But an absolute reality, and this was a headline in the Star, is that e-cigarettes are causing an epidemic of nicotine poisoning in children. It's readily absorbed through the skin, and you can see this, the dexterity that you need to be able to fill this little chamber here. And if any of this nicotine liquid, especially when it's so concentrated, get on your hands, just wipe it off. And I continue with what I'm doing. Unless you wash this off your hand, it's going to be there and it's going to be absorbed. And it's not only children that are at risk. Even puppies have died because they've chewed on their master's e-cigarettes and liquids lying around. So this is old data, right? This is 2015. I couldn't find anything for New Zealand, but look at this increase of accident and emergency and poison centres reports. And this is any exposure, whether you swallow it, inhale it, or absorbed by skin or by eyes. And yeah, it is a lot smaller than those that try to take themselves out of the gene pool with tablets. But the reality does exist. And the problem is, especially for young children, not only those under 6, but especially those under 2, the figures are quite alarming because everything goes into their mouth. A parent may be a bit responsible and they may put their stuff away, but if you've got a sibling that's smoking, that's leaving stuff around, and a youngster puts it in their mouth, look at the increase here, 1,500% increase in the number of reports. And children are worse off when they've been exposed to this concentrated e-liquid, and more severe outcomes when compared to cigarettes. 1 death has been reported. So just be aware, just warn your patients that if they're going to go to e-cigarettes, 5 minutes, thank you. They've got to keep it out of the way of children. But what's happened in America, and we can see this massive increase in the youth, and we know these youngsters, rather dead than out of fashion, hey? Boys and girls, massive increase, and they respond to advertising really well. They've all got tablets and handhelds. They're in the mall all the time, and more money that's spent on e-cigarettes, the use of e-cigarettes amongst the youth actually increase. So in 2016, the Surgeon General published a report that said it poses a significant and avoidable risk for our young people. So this is something that we need to talk about. They've discovered in America that it does act as a gateway for smoking. In the UK, they're very clear that it does not act as a gateway, but it's something that we need to be aware of. We need to talk about it. Forgive me for saying this, but it's almost like sex education. You've got to talk about it, and the sooner you talk about it, the better for them. And there's information on the Ministry of Health website for healthcare workers about e-cigarettes, and this is from the website of the Surgeon General for parents, a fact sheet for parents to help them talk to their children, a fact sheet for clinicians to help. This is a young man behind the page here, to help you to talk them, to open that conversation and talk to them. So, after all of this, is that how you feel? Who will not use an e-cigarette for that patient for whom it's going to be the last resort?
Unless it's the last resort.
This is last resort. So the information that I've shared, I was hoping that I was not going to scare you. I just wanted to put it on your radar. Are you comfortable with that? It's like that list of adverse drug reactions that says the rare ones. So you don't prescribe it because there's rare side effects. You still use it. But be aware of these things because new publications are going to come out and you just need to be aware of that. So what's happened is that in New Zealand, a study was done, the first ever randomized controlled trial, only 2 in the world. This one had the intent to stop smoking. And what they proved is that it was sort of on par with patches, but really helping patients to cut down. And the other important thing to remember is the Cochrane report, where they had a comparison and found that e-cigarettes help patients to abstain from smoking for at least 9 months. And it helps them to reduce and to cut down. There's not a lot of evidence available. This is about as much as there is. But yes, it is helpful. And a lot of the data lags about 3 years behind public behavior. And we've seen this with the report that was published. So I hope with that you're not completely baffled. And happy to hand over to John. Is there any specific questions?
When you say well-made devices, reasonable devices, can you just give us
Rosie is going to do the hands-on, and she's got some devices that she's going to show you as well. So, any other key questions?
Vaping and pregnancy?
Well, if you've got a patient, it's just like a patient coming in and say, well, I've just given up smoking, but I'm actually vaping. She shouldn't be exposed to nicotine. And the NRT devices, the patches, are probably safer for her to use, but it's better not to. So there's less toxins in it, but it's advised for them not to use it during pregnancy. Okay.
Do you think that health professionals are coming out, and we've got a lot of clean nicotine devices available, some of which aren't subsidised in New Zealand? Do you not think we should be advocating for the subsidy of all of those?
Yes, I fully agree.
Saving the e-cigarette for prescription only as a last resort.
Well, whether it'll ever be available on a prescription is a different situation because the government has decided that it'll be a consumer product.
But who are they being bought by?
Who are they being? I can't answer that question, but rightfully, as you're saying, there's a lot, as John has rightfully showed up, there's prescription medication available, there's NRT available. These have been tested, it's licensed, it's there to use. That is your first choice. But there are patients that even though you've done all of that, they've been on all of the treatment, if that patient still fails, an e-cigarette may be the last resort.
As the last resort?
Absolute, you've gone down the road.
You're saying about the UK BMJ or BMA, whatever it was, coming out with support documents. ERS, European Respiratory Society has just answered that with, no, we can't support this. And that was February.
Nothing has divided.
It's really concerning.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a respiratory nurse and I'm really concerned about the long-term effects
Yeah.
of the cell changes that are happening.
Yeah.
It's not normal.
No, and that's why the registered products are the most important ones to go for. Those are the ones that have been tested. Those are the ones. But as John will take you through the vape to quit protocol, if this is the last resort, and you may be just going to use it for a few months and get that patient off smoking completely, but it's not for every person, and it's not for each and every one out there. It's not, and it clearly says it's only for smokers and for those that cannot come off it. Okay.